Hello, I'm Dr. Bill Brennan, lead innovator in Farmingdale Public Schools and the guest editor for the New York State ASCD Fall Impact Journal. Today, more and more schools and districts across New York State are exploring new pathways to student engagement. And in an effort to build on this knowledge, the theme for the New York State ASCD Fall Impact Journal is engaging all students, but through a leadership lens. Our journal leans in on the perspectives of many and offers a fresh perspective on engaging all students. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Steve Constantino, who is an author, speaker, and leader presently serving as a school district superintendent. Steve and I will be discussing impacting student engagement by rethinking family engagement. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Bill, for having me. This is great. Thank you very much.
Excellent. It's a pleasure speaking with you today on Google Hangout and to supplement your wonderful article in our fall journal. And so, speaking of your article, there was something I wanted to ask you about in that article. You talk about the pathway to student engagement, and you added, what is clear is that to create an atmosphere and the circumstances such that students are engaged and ready to learn. I love this next part. Schools must face the brutal fact that they're unable to do it alone. Can I just ask you, what are you suggesting there?
Well, and I borrow the term brutal fact from Jim Collins' story of the Admiral Stockdale and the Stockdale paradox, where very briefly, as a prisoner of war, he always had hope that he would see his family again, but never lost sight of the brutal fact of his reality. And so when I read that many years ago, I decided I liked that term. And I think sometimes we just need to face the facts. And the facts are this, that we have always had achievement gaps in education. We have tried many things in our business to help those gaps. And sometimes we have been successful and other times we have not. We have seen those gaps shift amongst different kinds of students, different groups of students in different kinds of schools. I also know too that if I look at all of the major reform platforms for education, those research-based reform models that say, do this, this, and this in your school, improve, each and every one of them includes the engagement of families in the academic lives of their children. So my point in all of that is to say, why not leverage the efficacy of the first and most influential teacher of children, that being their families? And so by leveraging that efficacy, we can gain that partnership, and we don't have to do it alone. I say in speeches all the time, the opening line to my new book, for example, is very similar to what I wrote, and it's, if we as educators could successfully teach all children by ourselves, it seems to me we would have already done so. And so I'm an advocate for promoting and leveraging efficacy in families, and an advocate for understanding that they can be a very powerful tool, and there's tremendous data to prove it, in helping all students succeed, especially those that we all are focused on and concerned about.
Yeah, fantastic points. And I love how you've added a lot of information of that in your article here in the journal. And I want to hear a little bit more about your book as well. Can you give me a little bit of an overview of your book?
Well, the timing of this, and you and I didn't plan this, just so the listeners and watchers don't know, but the book actually is coming out this week. As a matter of fact, it may even be ready for sale today. It's been in a pre-sale mode with Corwin, and I think today's the big day. So it's really kind of ironic that we're having this conversation. But I've been working on family engagement research and practice for about 20 years. And this is the fourth book that I have written. And this one is called Engaging Every Family, 5 Simple Principles. And it's designed to do for two things. Let me just say this. One, it tries to underscore that family engagement is a process, not an event or a series of events, number one. And number two, it is written as somewhat of a field book, as a professional development book, so that teachers, administrators, schools, groups of people could start at the beginning of this book and work their way through this process that reflect, to get ideas, to implement practice, and to determine through measurement how that practice has worked with engaging families. So I'm really excited about this book. I hope it resonates. It's been a long time coming. It's been a couple of years trying to get this right, and we think we've got it right. Time will tell. But it's exciting work, and it's something that's been important to me for a long, long time. I personally leveraged family engagement as a high school principal many years ago and had really tremendous successes with engaging families and improving the academic achievement of students who, prior to this opportunity, had not improved to the levels that we were comfortable with.
That's great. I look forward to checking that book out and your others. Speaking of practicality, I wanted to just bring up a point. You know, working in Farmingdale schools, we've really tapped into some different strategies to reach families, and largely technology-based. As an expert in the field, somebody who's living this every single day, I'm wondering, does technology fit into this model, into your model? And what are you seeing as stories from the field?
I think absolutely. Technology has to fit because it's a way of life. So it would be myopic to think that technology didn't have a role. My only comment about technology is that it should not be the end all and be all of how we engage people in organizations, because there is a difference, and there is a distinct difference between engaging someone and communicating with them. And that's a point that I try to make. And there's actually technologies now being developed that are embracing the concept of engaging, where not only do I send you information, but you have an opportunity to dialogue with me. You have an opportunity to see what's happening, to understand what's happening. And we are seeing that technology is reaching people where they are. I think we have to be realistic about our society. We have to be realistic about the everyone's crazy schedules, yours, mine, families, everybody. And so I think that there's an important role. We actually we've devoted, a whole portion of the new book. The second principle in our logic model is called Building Relationships and Communicating with Every Family. And certainly under that guise of communication, we have actually used some research about the availability of technology with all kinds of families, and actually used a research model that was developed in 1989, believe it or not, that we've now adapted to modern technology. And we kind of challenge the reader to say, based on the technology and based on this research, how could you adapt that to technology that didn't exist when the research was written? So it plays very much an important role. What I hear from the field is we understand that texting is becoming more acceptable. People want information quickly. They want it in short doses. They want it immediately. And it really mirrors, in my opinion, I'm not an economist, and I don't pretend to be one or play one on TV, but in my opinion, the new economy is about mobility. It's about leveraging what you want. It's about customization, and it's about quality. I think if you take those basic tenets of the economy and you apply them to technology in use with family engagement, they really go hand in hand. So I see a lot of use of text. And as I just said a few minutes ago, I see several startups around the country. As a matter of fact, I was just visiting one last week in California, where their purpose is to go beyond communicating. Their purpose is, how could we leverage technology to engage someone? And to engage someone means that I'm going to create an experience that's meaningful and relevant to them. And I think that's a pretty exciting concept, because that takes it a step beyond communication.
I wanted to ask you too about, and I think you might have just painted that picture for me there. What excites you about the future? Is that it? Is that what the point of, there's a difference between communication and engagement? Is that the what's emerging here?
Yeah, and I'm excited and fearful at the same time. I'm excited because I think that technology offers great opportunities to bring what I'm referring to lately as family engagement 2.0, taking it to a level that perhaps we couldn't conceive of, 5 or 10 years ago. I'm also concerned, though, that technology becomes a wall in which we hide behind, and we send things out, and it becomes the only way we communicate with people. And I still believe that as long as there are human beings running the world, that their face-to-face contact cannot be replaced. You can't build a relationship in 140 characters. And most importantly is you can't build the kind of trust necessary to engage families who perhaps have been traditionally disengaged or disenfranchised from schools. So while I'm excited about it, I often share with audiences and with folks that I work with that it is not the only thing there. It is a wonderful vehicle. I think the same thing is true in schools. We all are using technology in schools. We don't think that technology is a result. We see technology as a vehicle to deliver good instruction. Same thing is true with family engagement.
I really appreciate that distinction, and you've got me interested in learning a lot more. Let me ask you this. Clearly, there's value in cultivating the relationship, engaging students and families. How do school systems create this as a top priority?
That's a great question. And that's a question that I've been pondering for about 20 years. And I'm going to try to give you a very short answer. Several years ago, when I was working in the field of family engagement full time, and I had started a company, and I was working with schools and gathering research and data and implementing it and sharing results, I was asked an interesting question. And the question was, Steve, in all of the successes, if you could point to the most successful schools and school districts that you've worked with, what were the commonalities? What were the things that made them successful? And I thought, that's an interesting question. So I went back and I started to review 5 or 6 school districts that I had a long-term contract with, where I was really delivering content, also coaching, collecting data, and working in a multi-year situation with a school system, as opposed to a fly-in, and flying out. And what became extremely clear in a very brief period of time was the leaders' commitment to family engagement, and it stuck out immediately when I started looking at all the variables. It had nothing to do with the kind of school district. It had nothing to do with the socioeconomic disparity in the school district. It had nothing to do with urban, rural, or suburban. It had everything to do with a superintendent or a principal standing up and believing that family engagement was important, understanding its role as a variable in school reform, and promoting and coaching and championing it as a viable process, just like other viable processes that we use to help improve our school and to help all kids learn. I have never said in 20 years that if you just engage every family, everything's going to be perfect. I've never said that. What I have said is that it is a variable, an important variable. And if you leave it out, the likelihood of you achieving your success is probably significantly diminished.
Wow, that's fantastic. I know you've referred to this as almost a form of courageous leadership in your article. Could you expand on that just a little bit for us?
Yeah. I run into a lot of people, and as a matter of fact, the interesting thing about the new book as well is one of the premises that I use in the new book is that I don't assume that the reader believes that family engagement is a viable conduit to improvement. A lot of other books written on the topic are written and they assume the reader is a faithful follower and will implement the ideas. My book doesn't start out that way. As a matter of fact, we start out in the beginning of the book with a little paragraph called Confronting the Nemesis. And the nemesis is our own skepticism about whether any of this is valuable, whether families really do want to be engaged. So many teachers, when I do workshops, so many teachers will say to me, I'll ask them this question: what percentage of families do you believe are apathetic toward their child's education? Don't answer the question out loud. Get a number in your head. And the teachers will get a number in their head. And then I'll tell them that research tells us that the percentage of families nationally who are truly apathetic toward their children's education is about 1.2%. And then I say, raise your hand if you had a number higher than 1.2%. And almost every time, every hand goes up in the air. Our perception is that because people are disengaged, it is due to apathy. That is a bad assumption. Bad assumptions lead to bad outcomes. And so the courage in this is to step out and say, this is important and we can do this. And it's not impossible. And it's not, I've had people tell me everything from it's impossible to it's pie in the sky. I've even had people say, well, it's fluff. We'll engage families, if we have time, but right now we've got to focus on getting the tests right. And that kind of comment honestly baffles me, because I think that family engagement is a vehicle, is a pathway to all of those things that you want to do. Not the only one, but a really good one if you understand that the most influential person in that child's life is whoever their family is now. And we don't use the word, don't use the word parent anymore. When schools, for example, send a letter home that says, "Dear parent/guardian," one of the comedic things I say in speeches is that, first of all, that's a step above "dear occupant," and it's going to get the same treatment. But when you use the word parent, you've alienated 50% of the adult caregivers of children in the United States. They're not their parents. They are, however, at that point in time, their family. And so if you say, "Dear, fill in the name of your school family," you've covered everybody, whether it's a permanent family, an extended family, a temporary family. It is the family of that child. And so understanding that there was a wonderful book written in 1988, I think, by authors Glenn and Nelson, and it was called Raising Self-Reliant Children in a Self-Indulgent World. It was a fabulous book, and I don't know if it's still available, but if it is, I would encourage everybody to read it. And in that book, the authors made an interesting point. They said that one of the things that is most fearful to parents and families is that their children will not exceed them in their quality of life, and that every family wants their children to do better than they did. And we're at a point now in our society and in our economy and the way things are changing where that's getting harder and harder and harder. And that strikes fear in the hearts of families. We can help that. We can help leverage that. And what we find over and over and over again in research is that when you have the courage to step out and say, we're going to do this, and suffer the slings and arrows of the people who think it's a waste of time, you'll end up with great successes.
Steve, you have me so interested in this topic. It's certainly opened some eyes for me, and looking forward to reading more of your work. Just a quick final question. Let's say brand new principal, assistant principal, administrator in general who wants to kind of do a better job at this. What sort of advice do you give them for their first step?
I think the first step is to learn a little bit about the topic and be convinced through science, through empirical study, that there is value to it. I think sometimes we have to prove its value. And so you can Google parent involvement and read enough to keep you going for the rest of your life. So if you're looking for basic, and if you go to Google Scholar, you can read more studies. You can see more studies that you can probably read in a lifetime. What I think is essential is, first of all, get a general understanding of what research says about family engagement and how family engagement improves outcomes, improves attendance, improves homework completion rates, improves student attitudes, improves teacher morale. There's tons of science and tons of research out there. I think secondly is to understand that there is a practice and a process to it, and it can be learned, and it can be shared and delivered as professional development, just like all of the other professional development. And I think lastly is to study sometimes not family engagement, but the science of engagement. Take the word family off. There's a whole research world out there about how you and I are engaged with what we do or disengaged with what we do. And the other thing I always say is to not fall into the trap of engaging the already engaged. We have so many traditional processes in our school system that make us feel good. One of the ones, and I get into trouble when I say this, so certainly I've gotten hate mail, but I keep saying it because I like to cause trouble. But we do things like back to school night, and we feel really good about back to school night because we've had lots of parents come and we've had this wonderful experience. And I always ask the question, who came? How do you know? Did you collect any data about who was there? Or more importantly, who wasn't there? And what did you really accomplish with this back to school night? Many times it's a study in engaging the already engaged. We haven't reached across that line to those people that are disengaged and disenfranchised. So the work that I do is to say, congratulations for all of the engagement you have. Now let's look at the correlation between disengaged families and students who are not doing as well in school as we hope. And let's see if we can't apply some process to that in order to leverage some success. The last thing I'll say is, and I make this point very early in the new book, strategies without process almost always fail. It's like the worst word in the world is initiative. If you say the word initiatives to somebody, it strikes fear in everyone's heart because the culture of our organizations tends to, Peter Drucker, the famous business consultant, culture eats change for breakfast. That's what happens to strategies in schools. And so we've created sometimes this vacuum of strategies that don't work and we become discouraged. So the whole point of the new work is to say, look at this as a process and understand that it's not going to change overnight.
Some great advice. Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Look forward to following your work and reading more about your articles and your books that are coming. So thanks so much for all that you do and this conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.